I wanted to take some time to address a few interesting groups that I feel like I'd never have enough time to address fully in a dedicated video, but I still feel they deserve their own segment on my channel. Doing a full expose is really time consuming, and there just might not be enough interesting information about a group to warrant a full video. So let's take a look at 3 really strange religious groups. Let's get into it. The first one I wanted to address is something called Messianic Jews. It's an interesting balance between Christian and Jewish. Here's the thing. There are lots of really weird and specific rules and behaviors expected of you in most Jewish groups. Like, for example, in lots of Jewish groups, you have to follow the 613 commandments. Thought there were only 10? Nope. There are 613, and they're listed immediately after the first 10. The 10 commandments are listed in Exodus 20, and the rest continue on in Exodus 21. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. Anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death. Anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Honestly, these commandments tell us a lot about what the culture at the time was like. The penalty for all of this stuff is death. Don't sacrifice a castrated animal to God. You can keep slaves. Don't put 2 literal seeds in the same literal hole. It's really bizarre. Anyways, about Messianic Jews. The primary difference between a Christian and a Messianic Jew is the fact that they think the old law still applies, even though they still think Jesus was the prophet and all that. So they're Christian in the most traditional sense, but they're also Jewish in the most traditional sense. They celebrate Passover, they follow Jewish laws, which are extensive. They just don't think Jesus did away with the law when he died, like most Christians do. Next on the list is called Raelianism. This group is really interesting because it's kind of another UFO cult, like Heaven's Gate was. And the idea for it was formed around the same time, the mid-70s. The founder, who went by Rael, but whose real name was Cloud Vorahan, wrote a series of books in 1974 and 1975 called The Book Which Tells the Truth and Extraterrestrials Took Me to Their Planet, respectively, and it details his abduction experience, among other things. The movement originally started in France. At this point, it's fully international, surprisingly. They've had impressive growth. Of course, as it is with most cults, numbers are self-reported, so it's really impossible to know if their numbers are accurate or not. Scientology, for example, claims they have millions of people. There's absolutely no way that's true. I've heard estimates of around 40,000, give or take. Christian Science has around 100,000 members. Jehovah's Witnesses are at about 8.5 million, and Mormons are at about 14 million. But like I said, those numbers can't possibly be accurate because it's self-reported, and we know some of the groups, like Mormons, don't consistently remove people from the rolls like they're supposed to. Now we have context for group sizes. Let's talk about how big Raelianism is. According to them, which is questionable, but if you're taking their word for it, they have membership roughly equivalent to that of Scientology, a little bit less. They say they have about 90,000 members, but leaked documents have traced the number back to about 18,000 or so. So what about their beliefs? Rael, the founder, claimed that he was visited by an alien named Yahweh. Interesting name, and Yahweh gave him some information about how the world works. According to him, there's an alien race of people called the Elohim, also an interesting name. I'm sure you're catching on by now, but both of those names are used to reference God in the Bible. Then Yahweh told him that Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad were all 3 born from aliens mating with humans. They came to Earth to communicate with humans, but we were too primitive to understand what they were trying to communicate. Rael wants to improve humanity until we're good enough to receive a visit from the Elohim people. Rael is the alien name that Cloud took on after receiving a visit from Yahweh. Now that we've got their story down, let's go over some of their ideals and beliefs. First, they think that humans need to perfect cloning technology so we can achieve immortality. I think the link between immortality and cloning is still missing, but either way, that's what they think. They also believe that sleeping with somebody should be a lot more free than most religions do. They're open about it, which is generally viewed as a good thing. Lots of Raelians have varying orientations and preferences. Here's another thing they believe. To join their religion, you have to become an apostate, i.e., you have to deny all previous beliefs. You can't hold on to theistic religious beliefs. After becoming an apostate, you transmit your quote-unquote cellular plan to an extraterrestrial computer. But new members are only initiated on 4 days of the year. Consider them Raelian holidays, in order from first to last. There's the first Sunday in April, which they think is when Adam and Eve were created by the Elohim. I have no idea how they reached that conclusion, but whatever. The second holiday is August 6th, which is the day that the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. According to them, it's not so much a celebration as it is a remembrance of our own destructive capabilities, which I can understand. That date is also significant for them because they feel like that's when humanity became capable of understanding the race that created us, instead of just worshiping them. The next date is October 7th. That's the date that Rael claimed to have met Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad, and other prophets from history, on their spaceship. And finally, there's December 13th. That's the date of first contact between Rael and the Elohim. It's kind of the date it all started in Rael's mind. There's a lot to cover about this cult, but I can't stay on it forever, unfortunately. Maybe I'll cover them in another full video. You can clearly see lots of similarities between them and other UFO cults. It's really fascinating to compare them. Anyways, next on the list of strange cults is Scientology. I talked about them fairly recently, but I honestly felt like it fit in nicely with the UFO cult theme. That's really what they are when you think about it. And I feel like I haven't talked about them enough generally, so they get a spot on this list too. For those who might not have seen my other video on them, they have something called the Bridge. The Bridge is basically a ranking system they have set up, but advancing up the ranks is really expensive. There are a few milestones along the way. Reaching the milestone of clear is pretty important, and costs around $100,000 from my understanding, and it usually takes years. After you go clear, supposedly you don't get sick anymore, and you can control things with your mind. After clear, the ranking system turns into OT levels. You've got OT1, OT2, OT3, all the way up. I don't think there's a limit, but people usually max out around OT8. Nobody is above that point right now. Well anyways, when you reach OT3, which costs about $400,000, and who knows how long in the religion, they give you a briefcase containing writings from the founder, L. Ron Hubbard. And the writings describe what basically amounts to their creation myth. 75 million years ago, a ruler named Xenu ruled over a confederation of 76 planets. To deal with the population problem, he called people in for tax inspections. I imagine that's kind of like car inspections, except for your taxes. So he calls them in and injected them with a substance that would paralyze them, then flew them to Earth and neatly stacked them around volcanoes, then dropped hydrogen bombs on them. Now their souls are floating around, inhabiting us, and we have to exorcise them from our bodies. It's a really interesting story. Dude was a great story writer. Anyways, that's their UFO story. But here's one more thing I wanted to mention about them. As I mentioned, when you go clear, you're not supposed to get sick. Ever. Well, they have something called the Sea Org, which is kind of their workforce. The founder, Hubbard, was in the Navy for a while, and as such, ran things in a very militaristic way. The Sea Org is kind of like a military organization. They have ships and everything, and when you sign up for it, you sign a billion-year contract, promising to serve in this life and the next. It's pretty intense. Only the most spiritual of the most spiritual join the Sea Org. They don't just let anybody in. Anyways, one of their Sea Org ships, St. Lucia, has been quarantined because of a measles outbreak on board, which is just beautiful. Scientology is trying to keep it super quiet for a number of reasons, not least of which is because people who are clear aren't supposed to get sick. The fact that the ship is quarantined like that just destroys some of their theology, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I mentioned this on my podcast. I don't want to see anybody get sick. I definitely don't want to see anybody die. It's very heartbreaking, and I hate it. But measles is less deadly to strong, healthy adults than it is to children or to older people. That's why you need to get your kids vaccinated. So the chance of death is probably pretty low in this one specific case, because most of the people are young, healthy adults. So that's pretty glorious. But still, like I said, I hope nobody dies from it. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys. If you want to support me, you can do it a few different ways. You can either support me on Teespring by checking out my shirts and stickers and coffee cups and whatnots, or you can support me on Patreon. YouTube numbers go up and down, up and down. Some months I barely make enough to pay rent. Other months I make enough to pay rent twice. There's no stability to it. I get the sense of stability from Patreon. So if you want to support me, then Patreon is a really good option. If you support me through Patreon, then you get access to my videos as soon as I finish making them. I also upload them to Facebook early, so you can follow me there too if you want early access. And finally, don't forget to check out my podcast. I talked about the Scientology stuff the other day on the podcast too. I talk about all kinds of interesting stuff, so give it a listen. It's on YouTube and SoundCloud and Spotify and everywhere else where podcasts are shared. All links are in the description. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.